The day my mother died didn't announce itself. There were no sirens, no dramatic final words. No warning that my life was about to split cleanly in two. It began with silence. Not peaceful silence, but the heavy kind. The kind that presses against your chest and tells you something is wrong before your mind can catch up. It was 6:12 a.m. I remember the time because I checked the clock twice, convinced it must be broken. My mother was never late to mornings. She believed sunrise was a promise. Proof that life continued no matter how hard yesterday had been. But that morning, the house didn't breathe. I stood in the kitchen barefoot, holding a mug of tea that had already gone cold. The kettle was still warm. She must have turned it on. That's when fear crept in. I called her name once. Mom. Nothing. I walked down the hallway slowly, like if I moved too fast, something terrible would become real. Her bedroom door was closed. That alone felt wrong. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. When I opened the door, my body reacted before my mind did. My knees gave out. The mug shattered against the floor. And the scream that came out of me didn't sound human. My mother was lying on her bed, one hand resting on her chest, her face calm in a way that terrified me. She looked like she was sleeping. Except she wasn't breathing. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew. The ambulance arrived quickly. Too quickly. As if the universe had rehearsed this moment without my permission. They spoke softly. Professionally. One of them shook his head just slightly, and that tiny movement felt louder than any words. They covered her with a white sheet. And just like that, my entire world disappeared underneath it. I don't remember crying then. I remember feeling hollow, like someone had scooped everything out of me and left a body behind. That was when Cameron arrived. My stepfather. He rushed into the room, breathless, eyes wide. He dropped to his knees beside the bed and let out a sound that might have been grief. Or might have been relief. At the time, I couldn't tell the difference. He wrapped his arms around me tightly. "We'll get through this," he whispered into my hair. I promise. I believed him. I was 17 years old. I had just lost the only person who had ever truly protected me. I needed someone to believe in. So I believed him. The funeral came and went in a blur of black clothes and hollow condolences. People told me my mother was proud of me. That she was in a better place. That I was lucky to still have Cameron. "You're not alone," they said. Cameron played the role perfectly. He cried openly, held my hand, thanked relatives. Spoke about my mother with practiced tenderness. No one noticed how his grip tightened whenever I spoke. No one noticed how his eyes never softened. They didn't see the way he watched everything. The house, the guests, the sympathy. Like inventory. After the funeral, the house felt wrong. Too quiet. Too empty. My mother's scent lingered in the hallway. Her shoes still waited by the door. Her favorite mug sat untouched by the sink. Cameron started making changes immediately. Small ones. He moved her photo from the living room to a shelf. He packed away her clothes. To help me heal. He took over paying the bills. "I'll handle everything," he said. I let him. I didn't know that while I was grieving, he was calculating. I didn't know that while I cried myself to sleep, he was already rewriting my future. The first night after the funeral, I woke up at 3:17 a.m., gasping, reaching for my mother like I always had after nightmares. She wasn't there. The realization hit me again, fresh and sharp. I cried quietly into my pillow, trying not to make noise. From the hallway, I heard Cameron's footsteps pause outside my door. He didn't knock. He didn't ask if I was okay. After a moment, his footsteps moved away. That was the moment something shifted. Though I wouldn't understand it until much later. Grief had made me vulnerable. And Cameron knew it. At breakfast the next morning, he sat at the head of the table. My mother's seat. "You'll need to be strong now," he said, sipping his coffee. "Life doesn't stop." I nodded, numb. I didn't notice how he had already claimed the space she left behind. I didn't notice that his kindness had limits. I didn't notice the quiet satisfaction in his eyes. But I would. Soon. Because the day my mother died wasn't just the day I lost her. It was the day Cameron decided to take everything else. For years, Cameron had been invisible in the way that made people comfortable. He wasn't loud. He wasn't charming. He never tried too hard. He existed quietly beside my mother, like furniture, always there, never questioned. When he married her, relatives said she was lucky to have found good, steady man. After my biological father vanished from my life, people liked the idea of Kamran. He paid bills on time, fixed things around the house, spoke politely, kept his opinions measured, he looked reliable. And that was the problem. Because men like Kamran don't need to earn trust. They inherit it. I was 9 years old when he moved in. I remember how carefully he kept his distance at first. He never hugged me without permission, never raised his voice, never demanded to be called Dad. He played the long game. When my mother worked late shifts, he picked me up from school. When I got sick, he brought medicine. When the fridge broke, he fixed it. Nothing extraordinary. Just enough to appear necessary. I didn't love him. But I learned to accept him. And in a house that had already known abandonment, acceptance felt like safety. That's what he replaced safety. After my mother died, everyone expected Kamran to step fully into the role of protector. And on the surface, he did. He spoke to the insurance company, handled the funeral arrangements, answered calls from relatives. People praised him. His being so strong for her. She's lucky to have him. Thank God she's not alone. I stood beside him during all of it, nodding silently, letting the world believe the story he was telling. What no one saw were the small shifts happening behind closed doors. The subtle power grabs. The quiet rewrites. 3 days after the funeral, Kamran called me into the living room. He was sitting in my mother's chair. That should have warned me. We need to talk about responsibilities, he said calmly. I sat across from him, hands folded in my lap, still wearing grief like a second skin. You're almost an adult, he continued. Which means things are going to change. I waited for him to say something comforting. He didn't. You'll need to start contributing more, he said. Your mother handled too much on her own. That won't work anymore. I reminded him gently that I was still in high school. That doesn't change reality, he replied. Life doesn't pause because you're sad. Something in his voice was different. Not cruel, but distant, as if my grief was an inconvenience. That night, he handed me a list. Chores, schedules, rules. When I looked up at him, confused, he sighed, the way adults do when they're pretending to be patient. This house needs structure, he said. Your mother was too soft. I wanted to defend her, but my throat closed. From that moment on, Kamran stopped pretending to be kind. He became efficient. Efficient with words. Efficient with control. Efficient with distance. He no longer asked how I was sleeping. He no longer asked if I'd eaten. He no longer asked anything at all. He informed. You'll cook dinner on weekdays. Laundry is your responsibility now. I expect quiet after 9 p.m. I complied. Because grief makes you obedient. And because I still believed, somewhere deep down, that he was trying to help. A week later, I overheard him on the phone. Yes, she's still here, he said. She doesn't have many options. The words hit me harder than I expected. Options. That was the first time I realized he wasn't talking about me as a person anymore. I was a problem to manage. A responsibility to contain. A liability. At night I lay awake listening to his footsteps move through the house, opening drawers, checking cabinets, reorganizing spaces that used to belong to my mother. Her presence was being erased piece by piece. Her papers disappeared from the desk. Her folders vanished from the cabinet. Her locked drawer was suddenly open one morning. When I asked about it, Kamran barely looked up. I'm sorting things, he said. You wouldn't understand. And maybe I didn't. Not yet. 2 weeks later, he told me we were going to the bank. Just routine stuff, he said. Since I'm your legal guardian now. The way he said it, calm, unquestionable, made it feel official. I nodded. I trusted him. I didn't know that trust was exactly what he was counting on. Because to Kamran I wasn't a daughter. I was an obstacle, and obstacles are meant to be removed. Quietly, legally, and without witnesses. The bank smelled like disinfectant and quiet panic. That was the first thing I noticed. People always think banks feel safe, clean floors, polite smiles, low voices. But once you've lost something, you start to recognize places where power changes hands. And that building was full of it. Kamran walked ahead of me with confidence. His shoulders squared, his expression calm. He wore the same jacket he always did for important things. The one that made him look responsible. I followed, clutching my backpack like a shield. We sat across from a woman in her early 40s. Her nameplate read Linde, Asiso Yumene Gaar. She smiled at me briefly, then turned her attention back to Kamran. I'm sorry for your loss, she said. This must be a difficult time. Kamran nodded solemnly. It's been very hard on her. He didn't look at me when he said it. Linda slid a thin stack of papers across the desk. These documents will allow us to finalize the transition of assets, she explained. Given that you're the surviving spouse and the legal guardian, this should be straightforward. I felt a small knot form in my stomach. Assets. The word felt too big, too permanent. Cameron glanced at me and offered a reassuring smile. It's just formalities, he said. Nothing for you to worry about. I wanted to ask questions. I should have asked questions. But grief makes you tired, and tired people don't challenge authority, especially when it wears a familiar face. Linda pointed to highlighted sections. Sign here and here, she said, sliding the pen toward me. This acknowledges your understanding. Understanding of what? I asked softly. Cameron laughed lightly. Don't stress yourself. It's just confirming I can manage things until you're older. Linda hesitated for half a second. It was brief. But it was there. Then she nodded and pushed the papers closer. I skimmed the pages. The language was dense, full of words I didn't recognize. Trusts, transfers, beneficiaries. I searched for my name and saw it printed near the bottom. That felt reassuring. I signed. Each stroke of the pen felt heavier than the last, though I didn't know why. Cameron signed next. The folder closed. And just like that, my future changed hands. We left the bank in silence. In the parking lot, Cameron unlocked the car and said, "You did the right thing today." I waited for him to explain more. He didn't. That night something shifted again. The fridge was suddenly stocked with things only Cameron liked. The Wi-Fi password changed. My mother's old laptop disappeared from the desk. When I asked about it, he said, it was outdated. I didn't argue. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from my school. It said my college savings plan had been withdrawn. I stared at the page for a long time, convinced I was misunderstanding it. The way I'd misunderstood the bank papers. I brought it to Cameron, my hands shaking. There must be a mistake, I said. My mom saved that money for years. Cameron read the letter carefully. Then he folded it and placed it on the table. I used it, he said calmly. The words didn't register at first. Used it. I repeated. For household expenses, he replied. Funeral costs. Debt. Things you wouldn't understand. My chest tightened. That money was for college? I said. She promised. Your mother is gone, he interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. And promises don't pay bills. I felt like I'd been slapped. You didn't ask me, I whispered. I didn't need to, he said. I'm responsible for you now. That was the first time I saw it clearly, not cruelty, entitlement. He didn't think he'd done anything wrong. To him, what was mine had simply become his. Over the next month, more things disappeared. A small investment account my mother once mentioned, her emergency savings, her safety net. Each time I asked, Cameron had an answer. Each answer sounded reasonable. Each answer made me feel smaller, until one evening I overheard him on the phone again. Yes, he said quietly. Everything's in my name now. My stomach dropped. I made sure of it. He continued. She signed. I stepped back from the doorway, my heart pounding. That night, I lay awake replaying the bank meeting in my head. Linda's hesitation, the words I hadn't understood, the pen in my hand. I realized something then. Cameron hadn't forced me. He hadn't threatened me. He hadn't rushed me. He had done something far more effective. He had waited until I was broken enough to comply. The next morning, I confronted him. You took everything, I said, my voice barely steady. Cameron looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not kindly, not gently, but with quiet certainty. No, he said. I secured it. I understood then. This wasn't temporary. This was the plan, and I was standing right in the middle of it. It didn't happen all at once. The house didn't suddenly reject me. It didn't throw me out or lock its doors. It simply stopped belonging to me. The first sign was my bedroom. One afternoon, I came home from school and found my door open. That alone felt wrong. I had always kept it closed, not locked, just closed. It was the only space that still felt like mine. My desk had been moved. Not dramatically. Just a few inches to the left. Enough to notice. Enough to unsettle me. My mother's framed photo, the one I kept by my bed, was gone. I searched the room, my heart pounding, until I found it placed carefully inside a drawer. When I asked Kamran about it, he didn't even look up from the television. Walls should stay neutral, he said. It helps with focus. I didn't argue. I was learning that questions only made things worse. Soon, other boundaries disappeared. He started entering my room without knocking. Checking my phone usage. Commenting on my clothes. Too distracting. Too childish. Not appropriate. Appropriate for what? He never said. At dinner, he sat at the head of the table, my mother's seat, and spoke about finances like he was managing a company, not a family. We need to be efficient, he said. I can't afford dead weight. I swallowed my food and stayed quiet. The house felt colder now, not physically, emotionally. The air was heavy, like it carried expectations I could never meet. One night, I woke to the sound of drawers opening. I froze, my heart racing, listening as footsteps moved through the hallway. I knew it was Kamran. He didn't try to hide it anymore. In the morning, my mother's jewelry box was gone. When I asked, he sighed. Those things are valuable, he said. They're safer with me. I wanted to scream that they weren't his. But something in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't anger. It was ownership. That was when I realized he didn't see the house as ours anymore. He saw it as his. And I was just living in it. A few weeks later, he handed me another list. This one wasn't chores, it was rules, curfews, noise limits, approval for visitors. At the bottom, written in bold letters, Fail your TMPLY the L of E can 6ES. I stared at the paper, my hands shaking. What consequences? I asked. Kamran folded his arms. This isn't a democracy, he said. If you don't like it, you're free to leave. The words echoed in my head long after he walked away. Free to leave. I had no money, no savings, no other family, he knew that. That night, I packed a bag anyway, not to run, but to remind myself that I could. I hid it under my bed, a small, quiet act of defiance. The house continued to change. Locks were replaced. Passwords updated. Rooms reorganized. My mother's presence faded with each passing day, like she had never existed there at all. One evening, Kamran brought home documents. He spread them across the dining table and spoke without emotion. I'm refinancing the house, he said. It's a smart move. My heart dropped. That was Mom's house, I said. She bought it before you. He looked at me slowly. Not anymore, he replied. Legally, it's mine. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle around me. A place that once felt safe now reminding me that I was unwelcome. By morning, something inside me hardened. Fear was still there, grief was still there. But beneath them, something else began to form. Awareness. Kamran thought he had taken everything that mattered. But he had missed one thing. He had underestimated how much I was paying attention. And in a house where silence had become my survival, I was quietly learning how to endure. And endure long enough, to remember. Kamran didn't break me with violence. That would have been obvious. Messy, easy to explain. Instead, he broke me the way people like him always do, slowly, quietly, and in ways that left no bruises. The first thing he took was my time. I was expected to be home immediately after school. No detours, no lingering, no excuses. If I was late even by 10 minutes, he noticed. Where were you? Who were you with? Do you think I don't know how the world works? His questions weren't loud, but they were sharp. Designed to make me feel foolish for wanting anything beyond the walls of that house. Then he took my money. When I turned 18, I got a part-time job at a grocery store. I was proud of myself. It felt like the first thing I had earned on my own since my mother died. Kamran didn't share my enthusiasm. You live under my roof, he said. You'll contribute. He decided how much I kept. Half of every paycheck went to him for expenses, rent, utilities, food. Things I had no proof of, only his word. When I questioned it once, he raised an eyebrow. Do you want to live here or not? I handed over the cash. The next thing he took was my voice. Any time I tried to speak up, he reframed the conversation. You're emotional. You're confused. You don't understand how things work. He said it often enough that I started believing him. At dinner, he spoke and I listened. When relatives visited, he answered questions meant for me. When teachers called, he intercepted. He controlled the narrative. To the outside world, he was the grieving stepfather sacrificing everything to raise an ungrateful girl. To me, he was a wall I couldn't climb. He began criticizing things that had never mattered before. The way I walked. The way I dressed. The way I spoke. Fix your posture. Lower your voice. Don't embarrass me. Every correction chipped away at me, replacing confidence with caution. I learned to move quietly through the house. I learned which floorboards creaked. Which times he napped. Which moods meant danger. Silence became my armor. At night, I lay awake replaying conversations, wondering what I could have said differently. How I could have made myself easier to tolerate. That was his greatest trick. He made me believe the problem was me. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I came home exhausted. My feet hurt. My head ached. I forgot to wash one plate in the sink. Cameron noticed immediately. He held it up like evidence. This, he said, is what happens when you get comfortable. I stared at the plate, then at him. I was tired, I said quietly. He laughed. Tired, he repeated. You don't know what tired is. Something snapped inside me then, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to feel it. I'm trying, I said. I'm doing everything you ask. He stepped closer. His voice dropped. You're doing what you're allowed, he said. Don't confuse the two. That night, I cried in the bathroom with the shower running, the sound of water covering the sobs I didn't want him to hear. I pressed my hand against my mouth and promised myself I wouldn't cry like that again. Because crying didn't change anything. Weeks turned into months, months into years. I graduated high school with honors. Cameron barely looked up from his phone. I enrolled in community college because it was cheaper. He approved, reluctantly. Don't expect help, he said. Education is your choice. I worked longer hours, slept less, spoke even less, and slowly something unexpected happened. He stopped watching me as closely. He mistook my compliance for surrender, my silence for emptiness, my exhaustion for defeat. He bragged to friends that he had straightened me out, that I'd learned my place, that I was lucky he'd taken me in. I heard him say it once, laughing. She'd be nothing without me. I stood in the hallway, invisible, and listened. And for the first time since my mother died, I didn't feel small. I felt clear. Because in that moment, I understood something Cameron never would. He thought he had broken me. But what he had actually done was remove every distraction, every illusion, every reason to trust him. He had left me with nothing but awareness. And awareness, I would learn, is dangerous. Because once you stop trying to survive someone, you start preparing to outlast them. I found the letter by accident. Or maybe it wasn't an accident at all. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind where the house feels suspended in time. Cameron had gone out, something he did more often now that he trusted my routine. He believed he knew exactly where I'd be and what I'd be doing. He was wrong. I was cleaning the kitchen, going through cabinets that hadn't been opened in years. I told myself it was just another chore. Another way to stay invisible. That's when I found my mother's old cookbook. It was wedged behind a stack of unused pans. Its spine cracked, the cover faded from years of use. Seeing it felt like a punch to the chest. She used to cook from it every Sunday morning, humming softly, scribbling notes in the margins. I carried it to the table and flipped through the pages slowly. Most of it was familiar. Her handwriting, her substitutions, her tiny comments, too salty, try again. Then, near the back, something slipped out and landed on the table, an envelope. Yellowed, folded. My name written on the front in my mother's unmistakable handwriting. My hand started shaking before I even opened it. I looked around the house, suddenly afraid Cameron would walk in, as if the walls themselves might betray me. He didn't. So I opened it. Inside was a letter written neatly, carefully, like she'd known it might need to last. Dao ao ao ana da ao ma a zena ao a anana adao za da. My sweet girl, if you're reading this, it means I wasn't there when you needed me most. And for that, I am so sorry. I felt my throat close. I've worried about this moment more than I ever let on. Not because I doubted you, but because I knew what kind of world you might be left with. I had to stop reading. My vision blurred. I pressed the letter against my chest and breathed until the shaking eased. Then I continued. Kamran is not a cruel man, but he is a careful one, and careful men are the most dangerous when they believe they are entitled to what isn't theirs. My heart pounded. She had known. I've made arrangements you don't know about yet. I did it quietly. Legally. In ways he wouldn't notice unless he was already looking for them. If he has treated you kindly, then you may never need this letter, and I hope that's the case. But if you are reading this because something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Tears dropped onto the page. You are not powerless. You never were. At the bottom of the letter was a name. A law firm. And a phone number. My mother had underlined it twice. I stared at it for a long time, my mind racing. Had she really planned this far ahead? Had she known she might not be there to stop him? I folded the letter carefully and hid it inside my backpack, my heart beating with something unfamiliar. Hope. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed the letter over and over in my head, every sentence a quiet confirmation of what I had felt for years, but never allowed myself to believe. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't weak. I wasn't wrong. The next morning, Kamran sat across from me at breakfast, reading the paper like nothing in the world had changed. I looked at him differently now, not with fear, but with clarity. He noticed my gaze. What? He asked. Nothing, I said, and for the first time it was true. Because the conversation that mattered had already happened. Between my mother and me, across time, sealed in ink and love. A week later, I made the call. My voice shook when the receptionist answered. I'm calling about a letter, I said, from my mother. There was a pause. Then her tone changed. One moment, she said gently. I waited, my heart in my throat. A man came on the line. Your mother asked us to expect you, he said. I closed my eyes. For the first time since her death, I felt like someone was standing beside me again, not to fight for me, but to remind me that I could fight for myself. That night, Kamran complained about a bill being late. I listened quietly, nodding, apologizing. Inside, I was already somewhere else, planning learning. Waiting, because Kamran thought the story was over. He thought he had won. He didn't know that my mother had left me more than memories. She had left me a way out. And once you see the exit, you stop panicking about the fire. You start deciding when to walk through the door. The lawyer's office didn't look like I expected. There were no dark wood panels, no intimidating shelves of books, just light-colored walls, a small conference table, and a man in his early 50s who spoke softly, like he understood exactly how fragile I felt. My name is Daniel Brooks, he said. Your mother was very thorough. He slid a thin folder toward me. Inside were documents dated years before her death. Trust agreements, contingency clauses, safeguards. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. She suspected your stepfather might try to consolidate control if something happened to her. Daniel continued. So she prepared. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She didn't leave you everything outright, he said. She knew that would be risky. Instead, she created layers. Layers, that word stayed with me. There were assets Kamran didn't know about. Accounts that required my consent to access. Conditions that invalidated certain transfers if coercion could be proven. You signed documents under emotional distress, Daniel explained. That matters. For the first time, what Kamran had done wasn't just cruel. It was vulnerable. Daniel looked at me seriously. This won't be quick, he said. And it won't be easy. Are you prepared for that? I thought of the house, the rules, the years of silence. Yes, I said. I've been preparing without knowing it. Daniel smiled, not kindly, but respectfully. Then we'll take it slow, he said. We'll let him think he's safe. That night, I returned home and cooked dinner like nothing had changed. Kamran glanced up, surprised. Good, he said. You're learning. I lowered my eyes and nodded. Inside I was taking notes. The long game wasn't about confrontation. It was about patience. I enrolled in community college with a focus on legal studies. Cameron approved because it sounded practical, non-threatening. "You won't get ideas above your station," he said once. "Law is boring." I smiled and agreed. During the day, I studied contracts and ethics. At night, I worked longer shifts. I saved every dollar he didn't notice. I documented everything, every financial decision he made, every account statement, every conversation where he claimed ownership. I learned how to ask questions that sounded harmless but gave me answers I needed. How much was the refinance again? Which account pays the utilities? Did Mom ever mention that fund? Cameron liked explaining things. It made him feel powerful, and power makes people careless. Years passed. I grew quieter, stronger. Cameron grew comfortable. He stopped checking my bank deposits, stopped reading my mail, stopped wondering what I was thinking. He believed he had won. He told friends I was finally stable, that I knew my place, that he'd done his duty. I listened from doorways and hallways, invisible as ever. And I remembered. The lawyer and I spoke regularly. We waited for the right moment. Because revenge wasn't about anger anymore. It was about timing. One evening, Cameron came home angry. "The bank is asking questions," he said. "Probably nothing." I kept my expression neutral. Inside, something clicked. Daniel called me 2 days later. "It's time to start," he said. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Cameron move through the house he believed he owned. He didn't know that the ground beneath him was already shifting. He didn't know that every step he took was being measured. He didn't know that the silence he'd taught me was about to speak louder than anything he'd ever said. The long game had begun, and it was no longer about survival. It was about truth. Cameron didn't see it coming. That was the part I would think about later, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. He truly believed the story had already ended, that the final chapter had been written years ago when I signed those papers at the bank. The first notice arrived on a Tuesday morning. A plain white envelope, official seal. He opened it at the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, already distracted by his phone. I watched from the hallway. At first he frowned. Then his jaw tightened. Then the color drained from his face. "What is this?" he asked sharply, holding up the letter. I walked closer, pretending to read it for the first time. "I don't know," I said calmly. "What does it say?" He scanned it again, slower this time. A request for documentation. A notice of review. A temporary hold on certain accounts. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "Must be some mistake." I nodded. "That happens," I said. He didn't notice my hands weren't shaking. Over the next week, more letters arrived. Banks, mortgage offices, investment firms. Each one asked questions he couldn't answer without admitting what he'd done. Cameron made calls late into the night, his voice low and tense. I listened from my room, counting the pauses, the raised tones, the silences where someone on the other end clearly wasn't agreeing with him. "This is my property," he insisted more than once. "I have documents." She signed. The last time he said it, his voice cracked. The court date came faster than he expected. He tried to act normal, but the house had changed again. This time in my favor. The walls felt lighter, the air clearer. On the morning of the hearing, Cameron put on his best suit. He looked at me like I was furniture. "You don't need to come," he said. "This is adult business." "I'm coming?" I replied. He hesitated, then shrugged. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined. No drama, no raised voices. Just truth, laid out carefully. Cameron sat at one table with his attorney, a man who looked tired before the hearing even began. I sat with Daniel. The judge listened, patiently, methodically. The document spoke louder than any emotion could. My mother's safeguards. The timelines, the withdrawals, the inconsistencies. Cameron shifted in his seat as the narrative unraveled. Not the one he'd told others, but the one he'd lived by. When the judge asked him to explain the college fund withdrawal, "Household expenses," he said. "Funeral costs." Daniel stood. "May I submit Exhibit C?" he asked. The judge nodded. It was a breakdown of expenses. Dates, amounts, categories, luxury purchases, personal travel, business investments, none of which involved a funeral. Cameron stared at the page like it had betrayed him. Then came the bank visit. The signatures, my age, the circumstances. Did you explain the full nature of these documents to her? The judge asked. Cameron opened his mouth. Closed it. Yes, he said finally. Daniel didn't raise his voice. Then why did the account manager note client confusion in her internal report? Cameron froze. For the first time, he looked at me. Really looked. Not as a burden. Not as a child, but as a witness. The judge leaned forward. The room went quiet. By the end of the hearing, the decision was clear. Accounts frozen. Property transfer suspended. A full audit ordered. Cameron's attorney whispered urgently in his ear. Cameron didn't respond. He just stared straight ahead, his world shrinking one legal term at a time. Outside the courtroom, he finally spoke to me. You planned this, he said, his voice low. I met his eyes. No, I replied. You did. I just survived it. He had no answer to that. The judge's ruling came weeks later. Fraud confirmed. Coercion established. Assets returned. The house, the remaining investments, my future. Cameron lost everything he'd taken, and the reputation he'd built to hide behind. He didn't go to prison. That wasn't the victory. The victory was that he could never pretend again. As we left the courthouse for the last time, Daniel turned to me. Are you okay? He asked. I thought about the girl who'd signed papers without understanding. The girl who'd cried quietly so no one would hear. The girl who'd survived long enough to learn. Less, I said. For the first time in years I meant it, because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply returns what was stolen. Cameron moved out quietly. No arguments. No dramatic exits. No apologies. One day his clothes were there. The next day they weren't. The house felt different almost immediately. Not because it was fuller, but because it could finally breathe again. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the door frames, the places my mother had once rested her hands. It was the first time in years I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. The judge's ruling arrived in the mail on a Friday afternoon. I opened it at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once signed away my future without understanding a single word. This time, I read everything. The house was legally mine. The remaining assets were restored. The fraudulent transfers were voided. Cameron's name no longer appeared anywhere that mattered. What surprised me most wasn't relief. It was grief. Because winning didn't give me back the years I'd lost. It didn't return the girl I'd been before silence became survival. Cameron had taken my childhood. He had taken the years where mistakes are allowed, where trust is assumed, where home is supposed to be safe. But he hadn't taken my ability to learn, or to endure, or to remember. I went back to school full-time, not because I had something to prove, but because I finally had the freedom to choose. I studied law, the same way my mother had once planned for me, though she never lived to see it. Every textbook felt like a quiet conversation with her, every exam a promise kept. The house slowly came back to life. I rehung my mother's photo in the living room. I unpacked her cookbooks. I let the rooms hold memories again instead of fear. People asked about Cameron sometimes. What happened to him? They'd say carefully. I never explained. Some stories don't need to be retold to be finished. I heard through others that he was renting now. That his business had failed. That he avoided people who asked too many questions. That wasn't justice. It was consequence. The last time I thought about him, I realized something unexpected. I didn't hate him. Hate requires energy, and I had spent enough of my life giving him mine. What he took from me was real. But what I took back mattered more. I took back my voice, my future, my name on the door of a house that had once been used against me, and I took back the truth, that survival is not weakness, that silence can be strategy, that patience can look like surrender, until it isn't. Sometimes revenge isn't loud, sometimes it doesn't burn everything down. Sometimes it simply rebuilds what was stolen, brick by brick, document by document, choice by choice. And sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is living a life no one ever thought you'd be allowed to have.